Welcome to How Preschool Teachers Do It.
This is Alison Kentos. I am an early childhood educator.
And this is Cindy Tarabush. I am an early childhood consultant.
This podcast is for parents and early childhood professionals.
Let our experience and research-based knowledge become your guide. Welcome, preschool peeps.
Hi, Pete.
At the end of this episode, we have another location shout out, so stay tuned.
Yay.
Before that, we need to talk about some very important screenings that we need to consider doing, I think, for young children. And I want to define screening for people. When we talk about screening tools, they don't diagnose, only specialists can do that. They don't prescribe things, only specialists can do that. What a screening tool is it's a first look to see if there's something that needs to be looked at further by someone that's a specialist or who's a specialist. That wasn't really good grammar. Someone who is a specialist. So I'll give you an example. Many of us experience as students, we have the vision screening with the school nurse. The school nurse is not qualified to prescribe glasses to your child.
Yeah.
They take a first look, they decide, should this child see an eye doctor because potentially there could be a vision challenge here. And then it's the eye doctor who decides if there is or isn't, right? So that's
right.
The basic overview of how screenings work. And we all go through many screenings. At my age, they love to do things like draw blood, hook you up to EKG machines. They screen.
Yeah.
You go to dermatologists for these things called full body checks. It's all a screening. And then if
they're looking for trouble.
They are. Oh my gosh! Every time they draw blood, I'm like, ah. So
yeah.
they're looking for, I guess we could call it trouble, but they're also looking for potential ways that you can be helped before whatever you have really impacts your health.
Yes,
right.
In order to prevent something, right? Instead of it developing and then it being too late, possibly in some cases, especially with vision and stuff like that, right?
Right.
So
there are screenings that we've been experiencing for generations: vision, hearing, things like blood work. Generations worth of kids standing there with a gym teacher being checked for scoliosis.
Yes.
Remember that? Everybody bend over.
I remember that now. Yeah.
And they actually, goodness, they found some. So there's these generations of we're used to children being screened. Speech, maybe there are speech, right? Speech screenings.
Yeah.
But there are other screenings that are newer and other screenings that are being proposed that we also, I think, need to just add into that repertoire and not have be a big deal. One of them is screening of children's development. Are they meeting their milestones when they should be, right? We want children to be developmentally screened, and they are usually, when they go for well visits to pediatricians, they are usually, if they're in an early childhood program, hopefully those early childhood programs are bringing in developmental screening tools, which have become much more popular now, of course, than when they first came out, because we know so much more now about the importance of catching developmental delays young. So you can, by the way, if you're a family member listening to this, or a family childcare provider, or a homeschooler, or I'm not leaving you out of the notion that your child should be, or the children you work with should be screened for development, because we can catch things very young when their brains are still rapidly changing and make a whole lot of difference. But there's another screening in addition to developmental screening that Alison and I propose should be a part of the regular screenings that we do for young children. So Alison, do you want to tell them what it is? I feel like there should be a drum roll. Tell them what it is.
Mental health screenings.
We think
specifically, I think anxiety, right?
Yes.
So yeah, because there's so many children now that have anxiety at school and at home, that if we could screen for this early, they might not turn into me when they're an adult having major anxiety and not knowing how to deal with it. Okay. So, and if they learn that at a young age, they just kind of grow up with, this is the way I deal with my anxiety, and this is just who I am. And they don't think there's no stigma about it. It's just, they are, unlike me, who did not grow up with any of that. And now as an adult is looked at differently because I have that. Okay. So,
you know what I wonder? Here's what I wonder. When we are, stick with me in this thought for a second.
okay. Yeah.
When we are screened for something as part of a normal childhood routine, like in school,
Yeah.
perhaps doing that with all the children, and we all know it's coming and we've all done it in school, lifts some of the stigma. Like,
yes,
if we were to, in early childhood, start to routinely screen children for mental health and anxiety, would that help then in the generations to come lift the stigma of seeking help for mental health and anxiety? Because, which all is really one thing, but because it's something that we've screened children for, we've been doing it with children from the time they were young. It's not a big deal. It's kind of, I don't know. I mean, I wonder if it would really help to lift the mental health stigma.
I actually think it would.
And that's one reason why we should advocate for it, because that stigma needs to be lifted.
Yes. And I think it would lift the stigma, because there is no stigma when you get that vision screening. So you have to go to the eye doctor. Okay, go to the eye doctor. Oh, you need to go to the hearing doctor. Okay, go to the hearing doctor. Go to the audiologist. Nobody thinks anything of it, because you're like, okay, yeah, the nurse told me I had, told my mom I had to go. Okay, you go. But like with mental health, it's like this big thing. It's like there is a stigma because there is no screening. You're like, oh, look,
that's bad. Oh,
that's bad. Oh, yeah. And why can't we change the stigma? And maybe that is the key to changing the stigma. Because to me, it's like the whole mental health thing. And I don't know if it's because I have these issues, but like to me, it's like, it's just part of my life. Like I go to that doctor because that's what I need to do to feel better. You know what I mean? And a lot of times when I'm having a lot of anxiety or depression, I tell people, I just don't feel good right now. And a lot of people are like, oh, she doesn't feel good, like she's sick. No, I'm not sick. I don't feel good. That's part of my health, my overall health, and I don't feel good, but that's me and how I deal with it. I know I know a lot of people who hide all of that from a lot of people, and I don't anymore because there's nothing to hide. And I feel like sometimes, like if I talk about it, then people will be like, oh, look, it's just normal. She's seen, it's just like a typical thing that people go through sometimes, and it's fine.
Also, and if you've never gone for therapy, I highly recommend.
Highly recommend it. Highly. Even if you have no anxiety or depression, it is amazing. Go. And I have said for many, 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 many years that I feel like all kids should be able to go to the therapist as part of either school or something else. And then maybe that would erase the stigma too. And then it might prevent some of these things that children go through later on, like it might prevent some things. You might catch something early, kind of thing. Like, oh, well, like he was able to talk to a therapist about it, so he worked that out. And then, so, but maybe there's such like this crazy stigma about it that
I don't know. Maybe screening children in the early childhood years for this sort of thing, getting them the help they need while they're very young, would actually make something like middle school easier.
Yes,
middle school is a hot mess.
If you can get them this screening,
it's so hard for some children. Yes.
Before middle school, then your middle school transitions and all of that's going on in that time would be better, because you would be like, oh wait, I could talk to somebody about this, or I know my triggers, so I can.
Imagine.
Imagine you're educating these children on themselves and how
from the time they're young, right? Imagine your 11 to 13-year-old just coming to you and saying, I'm feeling a little anxious. Can I talk to the therapist again? Because it's something that has just become a part of their normal world, and it's not stigmatized.
And instead of, doing that, like your 13-year-old comes to you and says, listen, I need to go to the therapist because I'm feeling this way, would be such a really good way to deal with something, instead of that 13-year-old be like, you know what, I'm just going to hide this and keep pushing it down and pushing it down and pushing it down. And then they're going to have either a meltdown or a violent episode, or be internally like just spinning. We could prevent all of that.
And, sometimes people say, I don't know, can you find all that stuff in the early childhood years? Yes, you can.
Yeah.
I have worked with children very young who obviously have trouble and are struggling with anxiety, very young.
Very young.
There are also, there's also work done. There's mental health organizations for infants and toddlers, and of course, older than that, but there are mental health networks having to do with educating people about the mental health of infants and toddlers and how to build their mental health. So even before, let's say, an infant can go to therapy or a toddler could go to therapy, you know who should be there? The people who care for them. Their families should be ensuring they're laying the groundwork for as much mental health as we can give them. So I was talking to somebody the other day who said, and I agree 100%, that they wish that parenting courses were required when you have a baby. And I said, it's funny, when my children were, before my children were born, in order for my husband to be allowed into the delivery room, and I don't know if it's that way anymore, but in order for him to be allowed into the delivery room, we had to take Lamaze classes together, and he had to attend and had prove he attended, or they weren't letting him in the room.
Oh, see, that's amazing.
So yes, that was with my older son, who's going to be 30. So we're talking about 30 years ago. 30 years ago, they had to attend the program that the hospital you were going to be in was running, so that the hospital knew they attended and they could be in the room with you when you give birth. Why were they only focusing on my breathing? And that sort of, I really think part of that should have been, here's how you lay good mental health groundwork for your infant when you bring them home. I 100% agree that we need to have classes for people to help them to understand the raising of their children in what is, let's face it, a very challenging world.
Yes. And I also think there might be a little bit of a stigma for people who take those classes, because I know somebody who has twins who are now like in high school, but back then she was having some trouble like dealing with certain things.
Sure.
And
I can't imagine.
Just like, take this parent class. And she's like, oh, I don't know. And she would tell her friends, you're like, ooh, you need a parent class, like that kind of thing. She took this class and she goes, it was amazing. It totally changed the way she parented, and it gave her confidence to parent. And she goes, I still use that stuff. My kids are like 14, 15 years old. She goes, I still use the stuff that they taught me 15 years ago. That she goes, the class totally changed my whole mindset on things. But people judged her for going to that class. Like,
that's
she wasn't
so
a good enough
sad. She did the right thing for her children.
She did the right thing.
I have to tell, there are times where I provide professional development. People say, oh my gosh, I can't wait to try this on my own children. People are craving this sort of support. And so if you provide them with support when the children are born, and then you continue to follow up like we do with physical well visits, we do these mental health screenings and well visits of young children, just like physical.
Yeah, and I think the screening should go all the way through high school, because anxiety beyond that. Yeah, you honestly, beyond that, because anxiety can happen at any time. We just went through a pandemic, right? So kids who before that didn't have anxiety might have anxiety about going to school now because they were home for a year and a half, or whatever, something happened in their family that was life altering, and you could develop these mental health issues at any time. So screening when they're young, and you'd be like, yeah, okay, well, they were fine when they were 3, and now the child's 8, now the child's 18, and something develops. You know what I mean? Like, if
you never stop being caught it, you never stop being screened for your vision. I went for a well visit last month, and they screened my vision with my glasses on to make sure but I know people without glasses also go and get screened for their vision during a well visit.
Because your vision can change at any time.
So can your mental health.
So can your mental health. Yes. Yes.
And it's all things start. We have an episode where we talked about, where does it all start? It all starts in early childhood. It all starts at birth. It starts with that infant, and it doesn't suddenly start in elementary school, when your child is having
Right.
trouble communicating, hard emotional issues, and now all of a sudden we're going to go running scared like to a therapist because this suddenly started. It doesn't suddenly start usually unless there's been a trauma.
Yeah.
Unless there's been some sort of trauma that has triggered, you know, post-traumatic stress in the child or something like that. Whatever the children are struggling with usually has its roots in these very young ages where we do need to be screening. And that includes things, of course, like developmental delays as well, right? So it has its roots in something that the child may have benefited from support in their early childhood years.
Yeah.
I wish they would have screened for that. You know, it was a very hard decision. One of my children, when he was young, was a more anxious child. And there was a point at which my husband and I just sort of looked at each other and said, this is beyond what we can figure out what to do about. And so we took him to a therapist for help with that. So it's not stigmatized for him. This is just something he's always done and continues to do if he needs it. And it was such a hard decision for my husband and I to take this child to this, and not because we didn't want to, we absolutely wanted to, but because we felt very alone and very different. Very much like, I don't know if anybody else does this with their kids, but we need to figure this out with our child. And happily, I had a friend who once had mentioned to me taking her child to somebody, and I reached out to that friend and asked her for the referral. And that's someone who's been just a treasured part of what this family has done ever since. And she's the one who gave us the referral. But she also, when I reached out and said, listen, I'm looking for a referral for this, I think she also felt less alone because her child had gone. Why aren't we more open?
Why aren't we more open?
Because we don't talk about it from the time they're little.
Because if your child had something physically going on, you wouldn't think twice about going to a specialist.
That's right.
Not at all. You would be like, okay, my son has this, and I need to go to this doctor for that because we're gonna get this taken care of. But when it's mental health, all of a sudden you're like, I don't know, I might get judged for taking my child there. I don't want the judgment to then get passed on to my child who's already having some mental health issues. I don't want to compound it and make it worse. Why? If it was something else, if the child was sick, you would go. Like, it's like I don't know why it's like that. Why
because society
Why,
has stigmatized it.
It's so,
like they have with so many other things. Listen, when people you know, when people are told we're going to do developmental screenings to see if your child has a potential developmental delay, there are people who are really scared of that because they didn't grow up with it. They're not sure how people will react if their child needs therapies or support with their brain development or their cognitive development. You know, people, or physical development. Somehow that notion of development also scares people, but actually it's in the early childhood years where we can lay such wonderful groundwork for their future. And if we don't do developmental screening when they're young, you know, they fall through cracks and they don't get the help they need often. And that's not okay.
Right.
1 in 6 children has a developmental delay. That's the statistic, and they're not found. So many of them are not found. I think, you know, very similar things can be said about mental health. There are a lot of children who struggle with emotions and self-regulation and other mental health challenges who would benefit from extra support in the early childhood years that would lay a foundation for more success in the future. So, and I think as a whole, I wish that we could all stop being so afraid of screenings, but I told you when they draw blood, I'm like, oh no. And you said earlier, you said they're looking for trouble. And I think we also, right?
We all think
also
that, right?
have to twist that and go, no, they're looking for, we have to take a deep breath. What someone taught me, a very wise person taught me, the Buddhists call a sacred pause. We have to take a sacred pause. You like that?
I like that.
You have to take a sacred pause, take a breath, and remember, screening is to help you. If they find something in my blood then maybe they can help me before it becomes a heart issue or a brain issue or a lung issue, right?
Right.
If they find something going on with my vision, maybe they can help me before blindness. If they find something about your child's emotional struggles, maybe they can help that child before it becomes an even bigger problem, especially as their hormones and bodies change as they head toward middle school. Maybe, you know, if they find a developmental delay, they can give your child extra support so that learning and isn't as much of a struggle, or doing certain tasks are not as much of a struggle as they might have been without that help. We have to, I think, and I agree with you, I always look myself at my own screenings as, they're looking for trouble. The dermatologist full body check, there's nothing more terrorizing than that. But anyone who's had one is out there laughing now.
What are they going to find?
What are they going to find? And isn't it true that I'll point to something to the dermatologist and say, I'm worried about this. And they say, that's nothing, but this other thing on your back, that has to go. I didn't even know it was there. So I do go into that sort of thing thinking, they're looking to find something. You know what the truth is? They're looking to find something so that they can help you.
Yeah. And they can prevent it from getting worse.
Yes.
Which might then become an unpreventable, you know what I mean? Like, so.
Why are we letting these children struggle and fall through mental health cracks for so many years until you end up with things like bullies and bullying, before you end up with depression and anxiety and all the things that our very young people struggle with today?
Yes.
Right? Why are we waiting? So I want you all to go out there and advocate for this in your programs, in your Board of Education, with politicians. We want lots of screenings for young children, and we want them paid for. That's what we want. We want them paid for. There's grant money out there. There's grant money out there. And all you have to do is qualify for that grant money. And there's a variety of ways you can qualify for it. We want grant money to ensure not just the physical health, but also the health of a child's brain development, overall development, mental health, anxiety, all that stuff. Fight for the money, because everything comes back to money.
Always.
Speaking of which, should we do our shout outs to the people who listen to us? I don't know. That seemed to come around. I don't know.
Sure.
Okay. So remember, we're looking at
work.
I don't know if I did. Made it work. I try the segues. Yeah. Okay. So last 7 days, and what we're doing is shouting out different places, one from somewhere in the world, the other one from somewhere in the United States, where Allison and I record this, for people who are at the top of our listeners each week, or every other week, however often we kind of take a look. So this week, round the world, we have in a top spot, ready? In a top spot, we have Japan.
Hello.
Japan. Yes, Japan. So hello, Japan. We're so happy you're listening. And in the United States, last time we did this list, it was California. Sorry, California. Sorry. You are now being replaced with Arizona.
Woo! There you go, Arizona.
Arizona, a place I have not visited, but would really, really like to.
I've never been there either. Yeah.
I have a relative who lives part of the year in Arizona, loves it, loves the weather when we're having winter here. So I have to check it out.
All right. Yeah.
Hey, Arizona. Maybe I'll eventually someday get there.
Yeah.
Hey, preschool peeps.
Yeah.
Go out there and advocate. Get your colleagues and friends and family to listen, and maybe your location will be shouted out in the future.
Yay.
Bye, preschool peeps.
Bye, peeps.